Welcome, welcome, welcome one, welcome all. Those who are watching live on YouTube, on Facebook, those who are going to be watching at a later time. Mazel tov, mazel tov. As we conclude Sefer Kinyan, another book, we move towards the end of the Rambam with 2 books left. As we finish this master, whether you're on board and have been every single day loyal and diligent in studying the Rambam daily, whether you're just hopping on board, and might I suggest and give a plug that these last 2 books and the first few books are easier to study. They're topics that people are more familiar with. And if you've thought about joining the 3 prokim, 3-chapter Rambam cycle, this is really a very, very appropriate time to hop on board, where we end off on a high and we begin on a high. You don't have to wait for a few months till we start the actual Machzer. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And we have a great pleasure. We have a great privilege of having on for today a special guest who's joining us. This is sometimes we have Rosh Yeshivas, sometimes we have Mashbiim, sometimes we have scholars in residence, and we've had all different. And today we are joining with Mr. Esriel Rappoport, who is the president of Malion Holdings, and someone who on the ground experiences and lives the halachos that we are studying. So a big welcome. Thank you, Esriel, for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So sometimes it's more impressive when someone who is entirely immersed in the world of business and the world of finance. I know you are a well-known coach to many and guide in business. The fact that you are a loyal 3 prokim Rambam learner, if you can just sort of give a word before we actually delve into the nitty-gritties and all the stories, if we can just sort of talk about, if you don't mind, and I know people don't like talking about themselves, but if you can talk a little bit about your learning of Rambam, and it's okay to be self-aggrandizing. It's okay to talk nicely about yourself here.
Thank you. So my history with Rambam goes back almost 30 years. When I was still in yeshiva, I remember being at a Fabrengen, and the Mashpia convinced the Bacham to start doing Rambam, Gimel Prokim. And if my memory serves me correctly, I believe for the next 11 years, I did Gimel Prokim Rambam. I don't know if I ever learned it, but I definitely said it. And then after that, I don't know exactly what happened, but I kind of dropped out. And incidentally, for some reason, I had never really had a chance to learn a lot of Gemara in my life, and I decided that I'm going to start learning Daf Yomi of all things. So I didn't feel right learning Daf Yomi and not learning Rambam, and not being that careful even with chitas at the time. So I decided to get back into Rambam, and at that point I went back to Perek Echad, and on and off I kept Perek Echad going for quite a while until about, I want to say a couple of years ago, I met Rabbi Cantor from Switzerland, which is very involved in the Rambam project. I met him by a wedding in New Jersey, and he's like, "Why don't you do Gimel Prokim?" And I'm like, "Listen, I don't know if I can do that." He used you as he said, "There's now we have this new app in Rambam, and there's this guy called Raleigh Resnick. And he gives a shiur, and it's a short shiur, and it's a clear shiur, and if you can do it in 25, 30 minutes a day." And the next morning, I started doing Rambam Gimel Prokim, and so I'm back in it. But then I actually decided that I'm going to be more careful with it so that I actually understand what I'm learning as well. Now, I can't say that that happens every day. I have days when it's very difficult for me, but I try to at least every day gain something, every day learn and try to at least pick up something from the halachos that I learn every day. But mostly I try to concentrate on all the different halachos that I learn. So that's the basic background. incidentally, is an interesting little story that's attached to that, and I attribute that to Gimel Prokim Rambam. I was by the oil maybe 6 months or so ago. Like I went to the oil at 4 o'clock in the morning. Just the time I like to go. There's very few people there, and I got to the oil, and Rabbi Cantor's brother from Thailand was by the oil, and I saw him, and I remember that he had asked me for a donation a year earlier, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to give him a donation. So when I was driving back from the oil, I called him. I knew who he went with the oil, and I called him up and I told him that I want to give him a donation. And then I hung up with him, and then I put on the Rambam in my car. And there's a problem with the app. It wasn't they had a bunch of issues with the app, and I said, you know what, they have to fix the app. I decided I'm going to call Rabbi Cantor in Switzerland, which was involved in the app, and I said, we have to do something about this app. He couldn't talk right away, but he calls me back and he's like, listen, I'm going to give you a number of someone to call, but now that I have you on the phone already, I want to ask you for a donation. He said, because I have this thing, I need to, I push it. I just finished buying this new Chabad house in Switzerland, and this thing came up that I need to register the building now, and it's going to cost, I believe it was like another $40,000 as a registration fee for the building. And it's like, I tapped out. And I said to him, listen, today was your brother's day. Today I gave money to your brother. And, but I said to him, I don't even know why I said it. No reason. I said, to me, it does not make sense that you have to pay this money. So I said, you're a nonprofit. I know nothing about the laws of real estate in Switzerland at all, although I'm originally from Switzerland, but I told him, it doesn't make sense to me. I said, I think you should check. You should check with the lawyer. And he's like, okay, I'm using the top nonprofit lawyer in Switzerland, but you know what? I guess I'll check. And he hangs up with me, and he calls up the lawyer. And he tells the lawyer, I just spoke to someone and he told me that I shouldn't have to pay this fee. So the lawyer said, what are you talking about? I do this all day. This is exactly what I do. I'm telling you, this fee needs to be paid. There's no such thing. He's like, no, I want you to check it out. I want you to check. And the lawyer apparently went back to the law books, and he found the clause that a nonprofit is exempt from this fee. And he calls him back, and he's like, I can't confirm it yet, but it seems like you don't have to pay this fee. Rabbi Cantor calls me back, and the thing is, it's not my story, it's his story, but he's the one that got me to learn Rambam, and I called him that day, and it turned out that the minute I called his brother is when he also called his brother, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And his brother says, at least call a few people, make a hishtadlus, make an effort, and try to see if you can raise the money. And that moment I called him, and then he called me back, and he's like, look, if you called me, then maybe you're the person. So
may the brachas continue from the Rambam. Oh, wow, wow.
So he saved himself those $40,000. Yeah.
Okay, continued onward and upward. So I'm moving on to the specific book. We obviously are all celebrating here together because we've just concluded Sefer Kinyan. And Sefer Kinyan is, they tell the story of the Heilige Kurkaban, the man who's studying all about the laws of the Shechita, but he's never seen the inside of an animal. So for myself, and for many of us who are studying, the laws of Kinyan and the laws of Shutvas and dissolving partnerships and acquiring real estate, other than the Chabados that I'm sitting in, that's the only sort of piece of real estate we've acquired, and we hope not to sell it anytime soon. But if you could sort of give a little bit from your perspective, and this is, I think, why we're talking today. Right. In other words, when you're learning these laws, can you give us sort of an insider? Where do you see, when you're learning these halachos, you're actually seeing this, you're actually living this, and if you can sort of give us a little bit of that, that would be very, very special.
So there's two specific. It's interesting. A lot of sometimes when you're learning something, and you have this moment where there's a correlation between something that, incidentally, in today's Tanya actually talks about learning halachos to be mitzaref yourself with chachmas shalakadosh baruch Hu, like the idea that just so it goes together very well with what we're doing right now, because so when you're living it, when you're living, a lot of times things, and just so happened to be that we came across some halachos in Mechira, and one of the halachos that I mentioned over there is that if a person tells you why they're selling you something, let's say someone is selling you a house, and he says, because I'm moving out of town, and then something happens and they don't move out of town, the sale is nullified by it. And it just so happened to be that someone came to me that same day, and there was a situation going on where there was a dispute about a property in a certain town where that person agreed to sell it, and they even went into contract to sell it. But he told him that I'm selling it because I'm moving, and he decided not to move in the end. And it was about to go into court, and they were arguing, and both sides. And I had just looked in the Rambam, and I got involved. I spoke to both sides, and I said, look, there's a lot of things to figure out for sure in terms of the costs associated, but the reality is that the person clearly told you that they're selling this, and I partially came across it in the Rambam, and without going into the whole halacha of it or what the actual din is, obviously there's a lot of time, it goes according to the halacha of the country, and when the contract is a contract. But because they were both Jewish people that were involved, it ended up helping them a lot in resolving their disputes. So
were they themselves Orthodox? These are people. These are Shemer Shabbat. These are Orthodox Jews who are following.
And so another thing. I mean, I'm always blown away, and even I know we're going to get up to the last halacha over here in Hilchos Aftos, where we're talking about slavery, and the Rambam finishes off the whole idea. I guess we'll get to it in a little bit, but the underlying principle and how to look at these things. So there was a story, actually started a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, where I was investing with someone in a real estate project, and he was buying it from another Jew, and it turned out that the broker, which was also a Jewish person, and him, at some point it got very messy, and it turned out that the person didn't really do his job properly, the broker, and the person selling it wasn't really in undisputed territory of ownership, and the person that I was investing with decided that he was going to circumvent them, and technically he was right. He was right, because he didn't deliver, the broker didn't deliver, and I said, I'm out of this deal. I do not want to be a part of this. And he's like, why? I'm telling you, I'm right about this. I said to him, I understand that you're right about it, but the underlying principle, does he know that you're right? Does he understand that you're dealing with another person, and you're hurting them, and you're going behind them, and in their mind, you're and I said, there's no bracha when you do a deal where you're taking advantage of someone else, and I do not want to. And it was a really, really good opportunity, and I pulled out of it, and it so happened to be that in the end, they sued him, and it ended up dragging out a long time, and he ended up having to pay the broker anyway, and he had to end up paying this person anyway. And in the end, he settled, and Baruch Hashem, everything.
So, do you really feel so? I mean, and you mentioned this. So, in other words, you have classic capitalism where my goal is to get as much money as I can to win the deal as best as I can. So what you're saying is when you learn, and again, without getting into particular cases, when you're learning Rambam, it actually makes you say, I might be right in this situation, but it's just sort of hashkafically the wrong thing to do. Is that the way you're looking at it?
Yeah, very, very much so. It's obviously, Rambam is not halacha l'maisa. We don't paskin according to the Rambam. And very often the halacha doesn't end up being necessarily the Rambam's halacha, but it's fascinating that when you learn Rambam, and specifically Gimel Prokim, where you're going through it, and you're going through it at a relatively quick pace, you will always find that the buildup of the Rambam's halachas will always lead to the underlying hashkafa. And we find it very much in these halachas. There's by la'olam oimdin das hanoisen. You always, you have to really understand the person that gives a gift. What was their thought process behind it? It's not just the fact that they gave someone a gift. Like what was the thinking behind it? Why did they give this gift? And there's in every halacha there's this aspect. It says it's not a correct approach. When when a person agrees to sell something, actually a story with my great grandfather during World War I. He lived in Switzerland in St. Gallen in a town, and he had a very coveted material. He was in the textile industry. And he agreed to sell to someone a load of materials. And literally a few hours later, he had never signed anything. He just had a verbal agreement. And a few hours later, someone offered him 25,000 British pounds more for the same goods. And 25,000 British pounds could have taken him through the next couple of years of living. And he said, nope. I agreed to sell it to this person, and that's what I'm going to end up doing. And he did not accept the second deal. And if you look in the Rambam, clearly, like, this is part of it. It's not just, I never signed anything, and I can get away with it, and I can take someone's better. But you know what? You agreed to sell it, and you stick to it. And there's a lot of bracha that lies in approaching the world that way. And this is one of the things that I very strongly personally connect to when I learn.
It is very, very inspiring. It's actually because, when you think of business, it's cutthroat, and if legally you're entitled to it, if halachically you're entitled to it, so the standard approach is go get it, and it's a very, very unique perspective, and it's a refreshing one that learning Rambam and seeing it through your lens, you see, and you also see the brachas that come from it, which is really incredible.
Yeah, it's very, very apparent in these business halachas, but it's not even hidden in the words. The Rambam is very, very clear that understand what you're doing, understand what you're representing when you do business with someone. And ultimately, the bracha, if you believe that parnas is min hashamayim, and you're going to get the bracha from the Eibishter, you don't have to worry how much more you could have made, and where else you can pull out another dollar, because you're going to get it. If you're supposed to get it, you're going to get it.
Okay,
Yeah.
You have to echo this throughout the world. We have to record you saying this throughout. So before we actually get to the end, in a few moments we'll actually conclude where the Rambam is actually going to tell us that although you're allowed to work a slave really hard, but as you say, midas chassidus, and one should go beyond that. Can you give us sort of another place where Esriel Rappoport, in his learning of Rambam and his life, connect anywhere in Sefer Kinyan that you've sort of connected, whether it's land, whether it's partnerships, whether it's anything else that's something that might pique people's interests?
There's another interesting concept. There's a concept of hanoya, which is discussed in this prokim, which is basically where you're not supposed to mark something up, more than a sixth when you're selling merchandise to someone else. And it's interesting. There's a lot of ways around. When a person knows how much you're marking it up, or if you're telling them, and there's things that are not included in it. But the Rambam really indicates very strongly that it's not just about staying within the system, it's understanding the system. Literally the halachos continue with haynoyas dvarim, which is not technically, which is where
verbal abuse.
verbal abuse, which doesn't even fit in over here. It doesn't technically belong into this part of the Rambam. And
right, you would think it would go in laws of character traits and deis, right?
Right. And really is trying to, in some way, telling you that this is a life choice. This is not just about, can I mark it up this much or can I not? And, whenever if I wholesale a product to someone else and I know that they're not going to be successful with the product, that and they tell me, no, I want to buy it. I can't sell it to them if I don't feel that I'm actually doing the right thing for them. And I will point it out to them. I will tell them, I don't believe that this is a good purchase for you. And if then they still choose, then that's their choice. But I believe that it goes further because, this is not just, obviously there's the spiritual, the ruchnistic element to this. And you have to always try to do things in the most appropriate manner. But, in reality, in business, when people see that you look out for them long term, that always comes back in a good way as well. So a lot of times you're going to find that these ideas are not just spiritual ideas. These ideas actually translate very well also into real life, and they enhance relationships and they enhance business deals and long-term business relationships. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is very, very, very cool. Okay, let's do it before we actually do the Siyum, which we'll do in a few moments. You mentioned overcharging. One of the ways out of overcharging is land in terms of price. Is that something that you deal with in your realms as well?
It's actually very interesting that land does not go into the category of haina because the pasuk indicates that it has to be an object, a movable object, and land doesn't fall in. But really, if you look in the Gemara, there's a deeper meaning to that, and it says that land is never overpriced. Not exactly in those words, but land is always worth its money. And I think that's actually a good business lesson, a deep business lesson, because long term you're going to make money with land. So there is no such concept as a person being over on hainaya just from selling land at too high a price. So
yeah. Okay. So take it from the Rambam. Invest in real estate. As a matter of fact, we know that he says we should. The Gemara says we should diversify our assets, right? 1/3 in 1/3 in real estate at least. Okay. Yeah. So with this, if we can please ask the moderator to please put up the last halacha, and we are now going to conclude. And we are going to conclude the Simcha B'Tuv Levav. We'd like to ask you, Esriel, please, if you can please teach, read, learn. Teach us the final halacha of the Rambam for Sefer Kinyan as we make tonight's Siyum, or today morning, wherever you are, this Siyum today.
So as I mentioned before, this is actually a very perfect halacha that indicates this overall underlying view of the Rambam beyond beyond just the laws of it, but what is the underlying concept of the halacha and how to approach it. So this is the last halacha of the laws of having slaves. And obviously it's very interesting, the idea of slavery, not discussing, and slavery is not a directly relevant subject nowadays, Baruch Hashem, but even within slavery, we see that we have we have to be very careful on how we treat people when they're in such a compromised state. But if in this last halacha it says you're allowed to work with an Eved Knani, you're allowed to make them do hard labor. It says that the midas chasidus, the proper way, the pious way of doing it, and the smart way of doing it, that is the person should always be should pursue things in a merciful way and in a righteous way, and he should never make his slave work very hard. And you should also not cause him any distress. You should serve him all the food that he eats himself, and you should also let him partake in his meals. Chachamim are Rishonim, and he says, if you actually look at the early Chachamim, they used to give them all the food that they themselves were eating. And they actually were careful to feed their animals and their slaves before they fed themselves. Can
we have the moderator please lift up the screen? Thank you.
The name it says in the pasuk that the slave, they look up to their masters, and basically what they see in the master and how the master treats them, and they're fully at their mercy. And should never humiliate them. They never, and not with your hands, and not with words. It says perhaps they were condemned to a life of slavery, but not to be embarrassed. And you should not scream at them. You should not be angry at them. You should listen to them. You should talk to them gently. You should listen to their complaints and to their concerns. It It's about even when they're fighting with me, I'm not withholding the justice to them. Like even in their worst situation. Am I not made in the same womb as they're made? Like I'm not coming from the same place as them. 1 second. It says really this is not a Jewish trait to behave in a non-gentle way. But Jewish people that are descendants of Avraham Avinu, where the Eibishter gave us the Torah, and he gave us the beauty and the goodness of the Torah, and he commanded us with his chukim, with all the different types of commandment. Tzadikim Rachmanim Heim. He says they are people that have Rachmanus, that they are merciful. And we also act the same way that the Eibishter would act, the same approach, which we know that the Eibishter is a merciful God, and we should be emulating him. Can we move it up a little bit? And here's the final words of the Rambam over here. Anybody that is merciful to others, merachamim alav, and that God will be merciful on you. And the Eibishter will show you mercy, and he's gonna bestow his mercy and make you and multiply you. Sefer Kinyan.
Mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. Thank you very, very much. Just as you were Messiah in this day, for the Eibishter should give you gesund and nachas, parnasa, and health, and joy and simcha to be able to be Messiah many, many other svarim. This was personally very, very inspiring and uplifting, and very much appreciated. Maskifim aschalala shlama. We immediately begin Sefer Mishpatim, where the Rambam opens up with Halacha Aleph, and he tells us that Arba'a Shoimnim Nemru B'Torah. There are 4 types of custodians. There are 4 types of people who are looking over your objects. And there are 3 general laws that apply to them. And the Rambam will, as he does, give us the general overview in the beginning. These are their names. Someone who is unpaid. Someone who borrows something. Someone who actually you pay to watch your items, and a seicher is someone who is renting your items. Hatzlacha, hatzlacha. Thank you very, very much again for taking the time. This was inspiring. I wish we could have continued longer, but we try to keep to our half an hour time limit so that our customers come back. And we look forward to seeing everybody back at the end of Sefer Mishpatim with Gesund and with Mazel. The Eibusha should help. We should understand what we're learning. We should learn it with more diligence than we did last year. Thank you very much. Hatzlacha. A very big shaker to Rabbi Cantor, who is the force behind this, to Rabbi Lane, who's moderating tonight, and to all those who are behind Niftzei Rambam and the Rambam app. Hatzlacha. Thank you very much. And Sei Gesund.